Fabulous. So, well, lovely to see you all. This is actually the last in our series of Meet the Grower Burgundy wine therapy sessions. We've got Dominic Hubert from Priorat on Thursday, and then we've got Filippo Chia from Montalcino and Jonathan Malthus from Saint-Emilion. So, you know, we're going out on a high. We're going out with a bang, I have to say, with one of our, you know, long time favorite domains. Also one of the most sort of Brian, I'm going to call you useful, you know, but you're a useful man, one of the most useful men that I know in Burgundy. Super articulate, super knowledgeable. Also, I think fair to say you're becoming something of a mentor to a whole generation of winemakers. That shows how old Brian is, by the way. It's not just the beard. He is really, really old. But no, definitely, it's a huge pleasure to have Brian Sieve, who is the maitre de cave at Domaine de Montille, has been the head winemaker since 2010, and has really taken this historical domain to new heights. And, you know, it is, you know, I think at the forefront of modern Burgundy. And, you know, as we have said in the collateral, the literature before this event, and in the past generally, with regard to some of the collaborations we've got up to, you know, Brian's responsible for our Hospice de Beaune barrels, our kosher wine, which this is actually the first, right behind me. This is the kosher Premier Cru Chalemot, Pouligny-Montrachet, in front of the Chateau de Pouligny-Montrachet. But, you know, there isn't a domain in Burgundy, for my money, which shows such consistent facility in both, you know, reds and whites. So, you know, we're very, very lucky to have Brian here with us this evening to take us through what is a tremendous selection of wines. I've got to say, some real favorites here. Some under the radar, some big names, and, you know, we're finishing with two of the finest wines from two of the finest vineyards in Beaune. So a bit of a treat. I was about to say we're gonna keep this to an hour, but I realize I've been gushing for 5 minutes already. But I'm gonna largely shut up because we have Brian here, and it seems stupid for me to waste your time. As ever, though, you know, please do use the chat function vociferously. If you've got questions or comments that you need to ask as we go, then please unmute yourself and crack on. Otherwise, you know, we'll keep this to an hour. I'm sure there'll be, you know, 10 minutes or so at the end to kind of discuss things further as one requires. So without further ado, apart from to say that we decided, as we're tasting at home in a casual manner, we were going to start with the whites today. The Beaune Aigreau 2018 will be your first wine. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Super kind words, Tom. Thank you very much. It's not to beat around the bush, but it's great to work with Honest Grapes as well. You guys are fantastic clients as well as promoters of the brand. So we feel the love, Tom. We feel the love. So we can kind of jump right into it. I'll go and start talking about Beaune Aigreau. I can tend to be a little bit chatty as well, just like Tom. So you can redirect me, Nathan, if you're looking at the clock or whatnot. And everybody needs to know as well that my email address is brian@demontille.com. And feel free, if you don't get a chance to speak up tonight or get a question that you'd like answered, I can always respond back. I am definitely not a writer. I definitely don't sit at a desk often. So my answers can be short and hopefully sweet. But I nonetheless am at everybody's disposal for if anybody has any questions. So let's talk about the wines. Oh yeah, we're starting with whites because whites to start off the evening, and nice little. Hopefully, everybody's having a little bit of nice apéro at their house. This is 2018 Beaune Aigreau. Beaune Aigreau is one of those vineyards. It's a little bit of a sleeper. I know that Beaune Premier Cru Chardonnay isn't necessarily the biggest selling or sought after wine in the world. But what we can say is that on good vintages, when you have a decent amount of crop, you have a depth of soil in the Bonnet Gros that's going to hold on to the moisture. So you're not going to have any vine stress, which ultimately means that there's not going to be dehydrated berries. You're not going to have too much concentration in the wines for the vintage either. You're going to have a wine that's going to be Aryan and bright. You can see with the Bonnet Gros, there's a good density and there's a good shape to the mid palate of the wine. It has about 25% oak on this cuvee on 2018. 2018 vintage was a warmer year, so it could eat up that oak a little bit more. But it also has very tight acidity, good tension. For the number of people out there, alcohol's just at 13 and your pH is at 3.2. So you have a very sharp pH, you have medium range alcohol and a weight and a body to the wine that kind of shoots a little bit above the belt. Bonnet Gros can be one of those vineyards. It's a little bit like Meursault Porouzot or Meursault Boucher, in the sense that our pick date is super important. We can miss our pick date by 2 or 3 days and the wine can become viscous and all its acidity become more flabby. So it's a wine that we really have to keep track on. It's usually one of the first wines picked every vintage, definitely the first white picked every vintage. And in 2018, we started the Bonnet Gros. It was the first white. It was picked on the 27th of August. So to give you an idea, 2018 was the 5th year that I've been here. The 5th year I've been here at the Domaine, where we've started picking in August. The Domaine in its life has picked in August 7 times. So obviously we can see a trend, a path that's going forward. We're having a little bit drier and drier summers. And we're also having a level of maturity based on the sunshine that's getting the grapes to a point where if we want to hold on to tension and if we want to hold on to persistence and length in the wine, we need to have our pick dates really correspond with the phenolic ripeness of the fruit. Textural wise, you can see the Bonnet Gros has a, speaking of phenolics, it got stirred a little bit. I stir the cuvee a little bit to bring up the mid palate as well, to accentuate a little bit this phenolic aspect of whites that I like. That's a component that I like in whites as well. I like whites. I really, it kind of sounds funny, but I'm not necessarily looking for really bright, fresh fruit. I'm looking for something that's going to be more reductive and closed, has a weight and a mid palate to it, and then has nice tension and acidity, almost like a savory salivating characteristic in the finish that makes you want to go back to it repeatedly. Sorry, Nathan.
I think one thing, Brian, I've found with your whites, certainly in recent years, let's say 15, and there's obviously a lot of difference within that, but is there's they really do express a lot more texture after maybe 2 or 3 years. You know, you feel that there's a bit more give in them, and that initial tension and that structure. And I know you've always said you're an acid freak. You want to pick when you're absolutely making sure that there's good freshness and good acids there. It's almost like your whites can take maybe 2 or 3 years of being relatively close, and then they just sort of slowly blossom. I've definitely found that.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping for that opulent level and expression of the weight of the wine in the Premier Crus to happen around that between 10 and 15 years. That's the style that I know that's not a great selling point, but stylistically, they're wines that I feel like to really represent Burgundian terroir, things need age on it. You need the Pinots to come to a certain level of development, and then you can see the idiosyncrasies the microclimates, and the meaning when I'm talking about microclimates, I'm talking about plant material, soil, and aspect, all the components involved. Same thing with the whites. Yeah, anything can be opened up in a year or two right after bottling, and it be fresh and cracking and have certain profiles. But to start to develop characteristics from the vineyards themselves, I feel like the wines need to be built for a little bit more time.
And Brian,
Dangerously profitable.
Sorry, Nathan, just was going to say, but before we move on to the Saint Christophe, just obviously we've been hosting these Burgundy tastings, at least with half an eye on the most recent vintage to be released, the 2019. So 18 is the first of a trio, and who knows what 2021 will bring, but a trio of solar vintages. You've commented on this previously, but I mean, how does 18 and 19 differ generally as a vintage, but maybe with specific reference as we go through these wines this evening? Where are you seeing the compare and contrast?
I think Burgundy is still in that window that is matching really well for Pinot and Chardonnay. And what I mean by that is that you take certain terroirs like Beaune, you take, let's just speak generically in Beaune, let's say Clos Vougeot, certain terroirs that are going to be heavier, they're going to be more clay-based. I feel like those regions are going to do better with this stage and where we are at right now, with a little bit more sun vintages, a little bit less moisture vintages, because those have heavier soils that are going to hold on to that moisture. It's not a coincidence that 9 out of 10 producers that make Beaune cuvées are making better Beaunes now than they did 10 years ago. It's because things are getting phenolically ripe, and they're just, though tannins are softer and they're more elegant and they're more approachable. They're not these hard as nails cuvées that had a hard time ripening up. So when we talk about vintages like that, if all parameters were kept equal, it'd be much easier to judge. 2018, we had a vintage where the whites had about 20 hectoliter per hectare more than what we've had in ages here in Burgundy. So that has a huge impact on the wines, meaning that you're going to have a bigger crop, you're going to have a little bit less ripe, okay? You're going to have a little bit less concentration, you're going to have higher acidities, okay? Especially compared to like 2017, for example. 2017 we had a warm year, but we had moisture, and we still picked early, but we didn't have the concentration of 2018. Okay, so 18 is going to be unique in that sense. 2019 was a little bit more of a complicated growing season. 2019 was a very dry year. 2019, we thought we were going to pick super early. Everybody was ready to pick again at the end of August, and we ended up picking around the 7th or 8th of September, if I recall. There's less yield in 2019. I touch wood, blow a horn. I feel like it was one of my best that I've ever been a part of. But I also know that it was a little bit more of a surprise going into the vintage with what we got out of it. So that's kind of a unique scenario. The 19s have lovely acidity. They're a little bit less concentrated than the 18s. And they have a little bit of like brighter, fresher, crunchier fruit. So it's like a little bit different of an animal. The 19s might be drinking a little bit before like the hard acidic 17s or the overcropped 18s that some domains had. I'm just speaking generally.
Yeah.
And then 2020 was a completely brainless vintage in the sense that the acids were perfect, the alcohols were perfect, the yields were just where they should have been. We had 12, 13, and 14 where we had very difficult growing seasons with frost and hail. And that even carried on in 2016, 2015, we had no plant material to lay down for the fruit. So we had a number of hard years in the middle of those teens. And now all of a sudden we're having 4 years back to back of super high quality and almost like a vintage that can suit everybody's desire in the sense of style from certain. So yeah, it's pretty fantastic vintages for sure. We're lucky to have seen that. Now that being said, there's a lot more producers right now who have their offspring going off to university, going off to Australia and New Zealand, doing harvest down there, sharing information, coming back, working with the co-op. The co-op is more interactive now as far as information is concerned. People are sharing more information in general in the vineyard and in the cave. So not saying that things are being demystified in Burgundy, but there's going to be a level of consistency that we're going to see from vinification, that the wines that you taste in somebody's cave are hopefully they're going to go to bottle and have that same quality show up in England and not necessarily have some of the faults that we might have had in the past.
Totally. So Brian, let's charge on to this Saint Christophe 17, because I think here we've got, well, you alluded to the fact that 17, was a pretty different vintage. So it'll be interesting for our guests this evening to try these two wines back to back, because Meursault we tend to think of as being a little bit maybe richer and more pliant and more supple, but clearly the nature of the 17 vintage is stamped all over this wine. But it's a fascinating wine, the Saint Christophe. So please lead us through this Meursault.
Okay. The Meursault Saint Christophe in 2017 was a blend of 3 different vineyards, and the reason why we have a blend of 3 different vineyards is because there's very few barrels from each vineyard. They're relatively small parcels. They're all in the coteaux, so they're underneath the Saint Christopher hilltop that's just behind the village of Meursault, and they're all village wines that are all in the coteaux. We wanted to kind of come up. It's the name of the cuvée. It's not the name of a lieu dit, for those who are counting my mistakes out there. Take it easy on me. Take it easy, my man. Yeah. So there's 3 lieu dits. One is Petit Charon, which is the lowest lieu dit in this cuvée. It's right next to the Grand Charon. It's right behind the village on the slopes that are ultimately facing due east. Then up higher on the first tier of the slope, you have Castet, and Castet is basically named after the vineyards are basically named after the development of these vineyard parcels that were all rock, and to plant the vines back in the day basically gave you a headache. It was a total cauchemar, in the sense that it's all limestone up there, hard limestone up there. Not only was planting the vines difficult, but then once they were planting, if you didn't do the right rootstock, the uptake of nitrogen wouldn't happen and your vine would die. So it was a tough development. It's one of the later development parcels in Meursault, so that's why it might not have as big of a historical name representation as some of the other vineyard parcels in the area. And then Narvaux. Narvaux has a very strong reputation. It's one of the more or highly reputed vineyards under the village status in Meursault. And partly because some very nice domains have Narvaux parcels, and they do single vineyard Narvaux parcels. This particular vineyard for us was a very small portion that only gave us 2 barrels. So we blended it together. As Tom and Nathan can tell you, we already make 42 wines a year. Don't need to make any more. So that makes the cuvée of Saint Christophe. So the Saint Christophe cuvée, like the Bonnet-Gros, vinified in a very similar fashion. Almost 30% new oak in the Saint Christophe. Take all the lees, stir the lees, same fashion. Élevage is a year in barrel, and then we rack it out of barrel before the next vintage. So to put the next vintage into barrel, and then we put it in stainless steel, and it stays in stainless steel. This one stayed in stainless steel for about 6 months, for example. I haven't tasted it yet, so I will taste it. The floor is now yours, Tom.
Yeah, I was gonna say, well, whilst you're tasting, Brian. So I mean, I've always enjoyed this one. I know it was a relatively recent addition to the portfolio. This blend of the three vineyards. And you know, you've got this this very kind of limestone rich soil on the Petit Charon. I have to admit, when I found out, I believe it was from the 2019 vintage onwards, that, you know, the Narvaux parcel is no longer part of the blend. You know, before tasting, I was a little bit nonplussed, a bit disappointed, because, you know, Narvaux is a vineyard I personally love. What I found very interesting with the 19 is the Saint Christophe does not seem to have lost anything by not having the Narvaux parcel. Now, is that, again, is that vintage specific with the 19, or do you think that somehow it's got its own identity already based on those two vineyards, the other two you mentioned?
There's, to be fair, there's definitely three different soil types from those parcels. What I can say is that I always vinify the wines independently, so I can learn from each press cycle and each élevage as to what I need to do to accentuate that cuvée or represent that cuvée in my best way possible. Even though Narvaux is at the top of that scale for sure, I think we also have to look at when you have anything on the coteau compared to down in the flats for the village, there's a significant difference, as you can see from a number of different producers, and when they're making a village blend versus a village wine. The reason why we named this Saint Christophe was to represent the hillside, to represent the slope, even though we were going to be blending a couple of cuvées together. So almost to find that in a way, that middle road to represent the quality of the wine itself, saying that it will supersede a typical Merceau village, but yet we just didn't have the volume to make a cru. What I see in 17, what I'm tasting right now, I'm enjoying. I actually opened the bottles an hour earlier because when I was told the tasting was at 6:30, I thought it was 6:30 my time in France. So I was like, okay, I'm ready for this. Here we go. And then it was, okay, 7:30. Okay. So maybe the things, my wines have opened up probably a little bit more than maybe some of these wines. I'm not quite sure how everybody's samples are showing, but what I can say is that the depth of the 17s, the acidic profile and the fruit profile of the 17s, for me, for the people that love the 14s, for people that love 2011, for people that love 2007, 2004s, the 17s are going to fall in that bracket of the individuals that have the ability to put some wine down for a little bit, open up some of these bottles a little bit later, and to see the development of the nutty characteristics that will come out of these Merceaus in 2017 are very precise. To me, they're very terroir driven. They show the soils, the limestone soils really well, and they're super vibrant at this point in time. So when the vibrancy settles down, and which is going to be masking some of the other components of the wine, and the soils come through a little bit more, I feel like these 17s are going to, and I'm speaking for the vintage. It was a wonderful season in Burgundy 2017. So
there's a great sense of transparency to the terroir in 17. I think you know, a lot of commentators mention this, a lot of winemakers mention this, that slightly cooler profile than we experienced in 18, 19, and 20 really gave you, either instantly or even shortly after, you know, an immediate sense of place and identity. And I mean, there's a hard edge to the 17 whites, just because I think, as you're saying, the structure is there. It's very intense. I think as we move on now to our third one and our first red, the Beaune Greve, I think it's really interesting. You talked about 17s with regard to the whites. I think 17 is a little bit under the radar for reds for a lot of Burgundy drinkers. We certainly had a couple of people, not many, and certainly not myself, who sort of didn't buy as much 17 reds because they'd heard that 18 was going to be an absolute kind of barnstorming vintage, and they wanted to keep their powder dry for 18. Now, personally, and I know Nathan will back me up on this as well, I mean, I absolutely adore 17 in red Burgundy. And I think it was Etienne who mentioned that, I think when we were tasting with you both in 18, we tasted 17s. I think he began by quoting Michel Lafarge, your neighbor, saying 17 is a mix of 59 and 61, and that the vintage with plenty of plenty of plush, fleshy fruit and early integration and a sense of floral freshness like 07, but with tension and spiciness due to the varying degrees of whole cluster that you use, and allied to a rare intensity of minerality and salinity accompanied by no harsh or square tannins. So you were delighted by the sense of harmony in the wines. So I do think 17 for me, I always think as being the vintage.
Hold on, Etienne said that? Etienne said all that?
Apparently that's what I wrote down. So
Well,
I mean, apparently, yeah,
you
must have done.
No, that's pretty spot on.
Yeah.
I think what people should do if they haven't is go out and buy a couple of 17s. You pretty much can't go. Okay, I'm going to speak for Domaine de Montille, but I've tasted other 17s around a little bit, and the 17s they're showing really well right now in their youth. Now you can project and see the leathery components of the Pinot will develop into from the wines, but their complexities from the get-go, from even during élevage, has always been exceptional. We've talked about it. We've been waiting for a period where they become a little bit less appealing, a little bit less spicy, a little bit less energetic, a little bit less crunchy fruit, and it just hasn't happened. So I'm not quite sure. What
bit of feedback, my fault. Sorry, carry on, Brian. Yeah.
So I think for people that you definitely don't want to dismiss, even if you do like more concentrated wines and the deeper, richer, extracted, darker fruit. I completely understand that. Definitely give a try to some of the 17 reds. 17 reds are a different profile than 18. Completely different style than 16. 16 is more of a classic vintage in the sense that the tannin profile of the 16s are going to take a while for those tannins to soften. They're going to take a while for those tannins to really integrate, let go, and then show the other components of the wine. 2018 has that power and density to the wines that are inevitably going to be great aging wines and going to have wonderful full body and color in decades. It's no question about it. There's something about the 17s that are fresh and bright and crisp, and it's kind of a complete package in this early state of things. My problem is that I know that the 17s are going to age really well, and yet I'm ripping through my personal stash of it because of they're succulent. They're so easy to go to and so enjoyable and so airy and so wonderful. So I'm a huge fan of 17, like you, Tom. And I don't have a lot to say negative about it. I understand the people that really like the concentrated and power vintages as well. I can see that perspective, but there's definitely a place for the 17s in my heart.
Totally, Brian. And just before we carry on, we had a hand raise, a question here. Please come on back. Wait a minute. I think yep. We're good to go. Hang on. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. We were having a bit of feedback because we're airplaying, but thank you, Brian, for being with us tonight, if I may call you that. Lovely wines. We're starting a cellar, and I would love your wisdom on how you think about aging and optimal drinking, for example, of the 17 whites, please.
I think the 17 whites are, as we kind of tasted with the Saint Christophe, and is that a Saint Christophe in your glass right now? Do you have a sample of that right now? I don't have your name up. I'm sorry. Anyways, what we were saying a little bit earlier, what I was saying a little bit earlier was that there's going to be a very pleasurable side to the 17s right now in their freshness and their brightness and that profile of 2017, but based on the chemistry as like when you look at the analysis as a winemaker as well, the ageability of the 17s is going to fall in that same profile as 14, as 2011, as 2004, 2007. And what I mean by that is I just had a half bottle of Bonnet Gros 2011 about a month ago, and there's still a wonderful level of tension. They're still super bright and they're super crisp and they're showing really well. I don't think ageability should be at any concern in the 17s. Very healthy vintage. All the wines very stable, very protein stable, without collage, without any filtration. The wines are one of those vintages that not really should not be too concerned about it. We didn't have any disease pressure in the vineyards, so the ageability it's going to be ideally it should, if corks hold on, it should be ideal would be a 20-year to crack it in 20 years. That does not mean it's not going to be wonderful in 5, nor today, nor in 15. So it's one of those vintages that however the acid sits on your palate and however that profile sits with you is going to be more of a determinant for then when you should drink the 17s. But as far as ageability is concerned, the door is wide open.
And I think with the reds and turning back to the Grève here, one of the interesting things that's been said about the reds 17s is that maybe they are a modern day version of the 1985s, which never kind of closed down. The 85s were gorgeous from the day they were bottled, and they're still gorgeous now. So with the reference to the Grève here, I mean, and any other 17 reds, do we think that as well, Brian? Is this going to continue a long and seamless transition from one stage of beauty to the next?
That's what we hope. That's definitely what that's what everybody aspires for. It's always nice to have periods of windows where the wines go into their hibernation and then come out in a different state and different glory, for sure. I enjoy that as long as I have another bottle to follow up the closed bottle with.
Yeah.
That being said, for right now, the 17s, I feel like the 17 whites over last harvest. So last harvest, they weren't showing as open and as lovely as the reds were showing, and the reds have consistently showed that to this point. This is the first 17 white, this Saint Christophe, that I've had in a while, and it seems like it's come back around and turned the page and gone back into its classic 17 mode. I completely agree with you with the 17 reds. The 17 reds have been crunchy, bright, and I love the fruit profile I love the red fruit profile of the 17 reds that is just wonderful, so fresh and bright. So I'm a fan.
And
Brian, can I add in on the 17s? Yeah, I don't know, Tom, you go to much better parties than I do. Talking about, what was it, 59s, 61s, 85s? Were those the vintages you were quoting? For me,
my weekday tipples, yeah.
For me, the beauty of, I don't have such a long memory or such rich friends, but I'll need to make some. But for me, the great comparison is in a way, not stylistically, but in a way with 11 and 7 for the reds. They're vintages that were overlooked at the time on primeur, and you could pick them up really well. And certainly, the whites were the concentration in 17, more than the reds at the time. But the prettiness of the fruit, the bright crunchiness, this Grève is getting some lovely leather to it. I just think in another 10 years, these are going to be absolutely gorgeous wines that the restaurant trade will hoover up, because not everybody bought them as primeurs.
Yeah, and to totally geek out on acid in regards to that, Nathan, I would say the difference between 7 and 11 is our total acidity was much higher in 7 and 11. So the balance of the acid kind of felt different to me on my palate, where the 17s, we had a warm year. It wasn't a scorcher, but it was a warm year. The acids were very balanced. We had very little malic, so the wines didn't move much when we had our secondary fermentation. So on the palate, you're not going to have like what the fours were harder than stone for years and years. And then all of a sudden, now that you start to see that acid soften a little bit and open up, there's more of a pleasure for me now than how it was for about 10 years. In the 17s, there's that subtle acidity that has a nice balance to it in the mouth, which is I feel it seems to be a little bit easier to approach in its youth as well. So good call.
Yeah, understood, Brian. But I think the thing that concerned people at the time with the 17 reds was they felt a bit too light. It was the lightness of them more than the acidity.
Okay.
But actually, I just think that makes them going to be marvelous drinks. They're just different drinks.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So Brian, we'll move on to the Nuit Saint-Georges. Although as people are pouring that, maybe just because it's a favorite of mine, just briefly give people a bit more about the Grève, because this is, I think, one of the signature vineyards for you. Your sort of baby Pommard as well, and it's one which I personally take every year. So that means you have to say nice things about it.
Well, yeah. To kind of finish up for the Grève. The Grève is kind of positioned right in the middle. It's at the bottom of a steep slope, but in the middle of the Premier Cru band in Beaune, kind of just behind Parc de Bouzès. What that means is it's a mix of 3 different soil types. The Grève has a limestone base to it that's not too deep, and it has the clay soil that typically goes along with the majority of Beaune vineyards, but it also has the iron that came down from the couloir, the drainage a long time ago. So it's positioned in a spot where it was a recipient of some of the iron pushed in. They're no different than like in Pommard. So consequently, that mix of soils gives that call it the blood orange component on your nose from the iron. You have a weight and texture to it, but also you have a stony characteristic that's coming from the limestone. You have a little bit of a mix of each one of those components of soil, so it doesn't make the wine a singular interest beverage. It has a millefeuille componentry to it. So it is one of the more it's one of the nicer spots in Beaune, that's for sure, as far as the complexities of the terroir is concerned. You have a couple other nice spots in Beaune for sure, but the majority of them have relatively deep clay soils, and that deepness of the soil prevents your vines from getting down to some of the stone that's below it. So you have some limitations, where Grève is one of those places that you have a good location, not too deep soils, and consequently you have a nice complexity that goes along with it. So
and it's a real keeper too. I know that the Beaune Grève I know can properly last. Whereas by comparison, moving on to the Nuit Saint-Georges, the Haut Saint-Julien, I know I think we've got Cade. I've seen Cade on the call this evening. I know this is one of your favorites, Cade, as a sort of a good house red. This has always struck me as, I mean, it's the Domaine sort of, dare I say, not entre de gamme, but it's sort of the first red from the Nuits, Cote de Nuits stable, which we really encounter. And I've always found it just remarkably accessible and very, very sumptuous straight away. I mean, given how much of your work is with Cote de Beaune reds and Cote de Beaune whites, and leaving aside, of course, the jewel in the crown in Volnay, I mean, how does this wine fit in the portfolio?
I think when I started about 10 years ago now, the wine had only been at the Domaine for about 5 years, vinified at the Domaine for about 5 years. And I think the wine Etienne was trying to find its place in the lineup and trying to figure out where how to best represent the terroir and how to, position it within de Montille, the brand. And I feel like it has taken us another 5 years. It has taken us 5 years to kind of figure that out. And what I mean by that is that there's a different level of giving that the vineyards up in the Cote de Nuits provide than, say, the Cote de Beaune. And there's a different level of searching that you have to do to find certain components out of a wine. And in the case of the Saint-Julien, to make the Saint-Julien approachable and enjoyable and savory and delicious, we had to reduce our extraction and reduce our whole cluster profile. What we were doing there is we were trying to take away some of the rusticity that the wine wants to give based on the terroir that it has. And we wanted to open up and make it a little bit more vibrant and make it a little bit more electric than what it was, than what we were producing. And I think that just takes time to figure out how to work and manage that fruit. We have good old vines it's a very flat vineyard. When you're standing in the vineyard, you're looking around, you're looking for some different components of the vineyard, trying to make it sound interesting. And how can I make this sound really appropriate? And in the end, it's a site that it's at the bottom of the couloir. Above it is Torre, another cuvée that we make from Nuits Saint-Georges. And this is truly in the alluvial fan drainage of the Saint-Julien. It is. What I can say is that we have these. This actually doesn't. It's not a great representation on film. See if I can get another one. These are basically iron balls that are found in Saint-Julien. And inside these in the core of them are little magnesium nuts, call them. And in the end, this is where a lot of the structure and the tannin is coming from, this iron that's being broken down over time. This is like one of the heavier rocks for the size that I've held. I have these in a jar on the table. You guys have both seen that, I think, Tom and Nathan. So it's one of those things where the soils are a little bit more complex than what you would think if you stood in the vineyard without opening your eyes and touching the soil. Because of that, when you do the punch down extraction that we do, when you pick on the earlier side of things to hold on to the acidity, when you use more whole cluster like we do at the Domaine, in the end, we were making something that was tannic and less expressive. And by cutting back on extraction and cutting back on the whole cluster, I feel like we're trying to find our little honeypot for this wine. And with the terroir, to get it to where it's expressive and concentrated every year based on the soil, based on Cote de Nuits, based on the varietal that's planted there, the rootstock that's planted there, and to just get to express that as much as possible in an elegant way is something that I'm working on, that minutia. shall we say.
It seems to be going very well, and I think the 18 vintage is it's that everything you said writ large. I liked I just picked out Neil Martin's comment on the 18 saying what was it finely tuned and pretty precise, just a village cru question mark. It certainly has premier cru ambitions, very fine. So clearly it's kind of moving into the territory of the Haute-Torre, just above it, basically. But it's a delicious wine. It really is. It's a great, for me, it's a very good, it's a very good introduction, I suppose, to the domain. Even if perhaps you're more known for the Beaune Red, this is a really good, it's a really good kind of placeholder for.
Both the two village wines that we have a Pommard Les Crus, which is a Pommard village wine, and then this Saint-Julien. And going back to the 2017 vintage that I have recently had a bottle of both those, and those wines are not only a lovely representation of 2017, but an affordable entry-level quality Pinot Noir from Burgundy. I feel like so it's if you can get them, they're quality price. I think what in France you say qualité prix.
We say QPR. The QPR is very good actually. So no, it works. And I suppose, moving on now, to I mean, we've done what for me is a great door opener to the domain with the Saint-Julien. We've done one of my favorite wines, the Under the Radar Beaune Greve, the one I take every year. But we're actually now going to move on to, we're finishing with the two top Beaune Reds from the domain. In fact, I would say genuinely two of the top Beaune Reds, full stop, that you'll drink. We've got the Taillepieds 16 first of all, and then you lucky people, the Rugien-Bas Pommard 12. So Brian, do take us through these two kind of essential pillars of the domain.
Well, I'm looking forward to tasting both of them as I have yet to. I haven't tasted either one in a while.
Yeah, we gave you a good excuse to do so. So yeah, we're delighted.
Etienne, you don't need to come for this tasting. I've got it.
Yeah, I got this one.
So I think I think Tom said it very well. To be fair, these two vineyards were the chouchou vineyards of Hubert back in the day. The Taillepieds vineyard, which is it's one of the closest vineyards to the domain, the original estate, Hubert's house. So he had an attachment to it. On top of it, one of the two parcels that we have of Taillepieds that has been in the family for over 200 years. So I think there's not only a great history associated with Taillepieds for the domain, but also an attachment family-wise for the de Montilles with Taillepieds. Taillepieds is kind of a unique place. It has hilltop gravel. It's not river bottom gravel, but it's hilltop gravel on top of limestone. And we might not get it in the 2016 because it's probably going to be a little bit too early. But what happens is that the gravel provides a level of salinity to this cuvee that goes beyond the limestone characteristic that inevitably comes out in the wine and what is known for Volnay. This is 100% whole cluster cuvee, the Taillepieds, and it has a tendency to take about 10 years before the Taillepieds really starts to kind of express itself and open up. And what I mean by that is not that the wine cannot be enjoyed in the first 10 years. It's more that once the tannin profile softens based on once again, our punch down extraction and our whole cluster in this wine, you then start to see the other components that are in the wine, and they become more to the forefront. I've had some really nice older Taillepieds from the domain. The majority of the time, this cuvee is 100% whole cluster. It's always been 100% whole cluster since I've been here. There have been years that it has not been 100% whole cluster, But it's one of those cuvées where the plant material, it's about 80 years old at this point in time, is it's very disease resistant. There's great phenolic ripeness on the fruit annually. There's part of it that it doesn't look very healthy on the south side, but yet the fruit that comes off it is in perfect condition. So it's a little bit of an anomaly in the sense that you've got limestone soils, you got gravel on top of limestone soils. The Volnay characteristic is we're going to be looking for the more elegant and soyeux aspect of things, but yet we are making it 100% whole cluster, and yet we are doing punch downs on the cuvee. So we feel like in time, and if you have time, it's a wine that ages as well as some of the great wines in the Cote de Nuits. So that's the Domaine's philosophy. I truly believe, Tom, as well, that it's one of the better vineyards in the Cote de Beaune.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it is. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a vineyard which stands the test of time. I've been lucky enough to take taste with Etienne, yourself, some older vintages too, and you know it absolutely is up there with the best Burgundies I've tried. But it, by and large, you do need a little more patience. But it's certainly, it's got everything there. It's tightly packed, especially in a concentrated vintage like 16 too. So yeah, marvelous.
And this is where, just to say a couple words about it, this is where we talk about this 16 vintage. This is a classic, to me, this is a classic Burgundy vintage. This vintage has tannins that are present, that are, they're not harsh, but they're still angular, and they need more time to soften. And yet the texture and the weight that is being presented by those tannins and the concentration of the wine itself leads me to think this is where 2016, the reds in 2016 can be of classic status. That's where this comes from, for me. And this is one of those vintages that I feel like, you know, all the hype that 15 gets, you know, I feel like it's an absolute fantastic vintage. I think I'd take a pile of 16s over a pile of 15s any day. For you know, when I look at all the different vineyards in Burgundy and the different styles of winemaking that's out there, when the moons and the stars come together in 2016 for that style of winemaking, I don't think you can find something that's going to be better. So truly a classic vintage. I enjoy those wines for sure. And not yet, not today, but yeah, I can see the progression
is going to be amazing. We're seeing a very precocious infant right now, but I mean, it is fascinating that given the very sort of the diminution of the size of the vintage, of course, in 16, that, you know, those remaining wines, they do have a unique character about them. It's going to be fascinating to chart their evolution. Now we're moving on to a vintage which I think is certainly entering its drinking window. And yeah, I mean, Rugien-Bas is the other sort of, I sort of suggested that, you know, the pillar of the domain in terms of the Beaune Reds. They make a fascinating pair, the Volnay Taillepieds and the Rugien-Bas. You know, this is, well, for those who aren't so aware, in the ongoing, and it's been going on for at least 100 years, well, let's say 50, about, you know, the elevation of different vineyards in Burgundy. There's no denying that if you were going to bump one vineyard up in the Cote de Beaune to Grand Cru status, the Rugien-Bas would be it for sure. And I think this is unquestionably the leading example of it. And we're lucky enough to be drinking it from a vintage which is sort of just entering the sort of early stages of its middle age, or the later stages of its early drinking window, whatever. But yeah, Brian, tell us some more about Rugien-Bas and the 2012 vintage too, for that matter.
This is
Oh, is that just me, or have we did we lose Brian briefly there?
He was overcome by emotion.
Yeah, it was like the full wow of the 2000. I see a lot of other people moving around in the background, but not Brian right now. Hang on. Gosh, I really teed him up there for a massive thing, and perhaps the sheer, you know, expressiveness that was due to come just exploded the controls.
Tom, while we're waiting for Brian to come back, shall I busk and tell people about the Hospice de Nuits Saint-Georges?
Yeah, good idea. Come on.
And hopefully we'll get Brian back. Okay. So it's lovely to see so many of you on today who are great Burgundy lovers. Tom and I have marvelous times tasting with de Montille, and I see several of you today who've been part of our 2019 and 2020 Hospice de Beaune syndicates, where we buy the wines at the Hospice de Beaune, and the élevage is undertaken for us by Brian and Etienne at Domaine de Montille. Some of you may have noticed that we're actually, for the first time ever, trying to do the same at the Hospice de Nuits Saint-Georges on the 14th of March. And only a week ago, Tom, amazingly, a week ago, we announced the syndicate for that. And we're already into our 5th barrel. I mean, it's just remarkable how many people have decided instead of buying game stock, they're going to buy Hospice de Nuits Saint-Georges shares. The deal is exactly the same as for the Hospice de Beaune. Basically, we only have 10 shares left out of 60. Just amazing. It's just gone like a wow. It's for 24 bottles, the nominal price is £2,640. But for those of you who've participated in the syndicates before, we invoice 80% at first, and then the last 20% depends a bit on what we had to bid. If anybody's interested, ping me ping Tom, myself, Luke is on here, ping us privately. Obviously, I can see several people here have already joined the syndicate, and we have 10 shares left. The élevage, because for the Hospice de Nuits Saint-Georges, is going to be carried out by our lovely friend Laurent Delaunay of the Domaine Edouard Delaunay in Nuits Saint-Georges, and we've got everything set up now and just filling our last barrel. So if anybody's interested, just ping Tom or myself or Luke, and I'm delighted to see that bit of busking. That bit of busking has got Brian back, so overcome with emotion, Brian, and back to the Pommard Rugien-Bas.
We're done with our interlude. Our interlude. Either Nathan, it would be you going around with ice creams up and down the aisles, or hawking the Hospice de Nuits, and I think the latter is definitely better.
I think Brian was disposing of Etienne and saying you can't drink any of this.
Oh, brilliant. So Brian, sorry, back to us. We were just getting into the Rugien-Bas there.
Yeah. So what I basically said to Etienne was, it was 2012 was a vintage that we had a density and a concentration in the fruit because of the hail that happened on the 24th of June was the date. So we had a hailstorm on the 24th of June. It knocked everything back at least 2 weeks, shut everything down, shut down all the plants for 2 weeks. When things came back online, we had a warm year. We had low concentration in the vineyards, and we had when you see the fruit, you had a big high skin to juice ratio, meaning that you're going to have concentrated, rich wines that are going to be almost Syrah-esque, but also a lot of things that were hit by hail are going to they're going to shrivel up. They're going to become disease problematic. There's going to be a lot of different issues going on there. So I basically said to Etienne, if there's a couple of things we can do with this vintage, and one thing we can do with them, we can be light and fluffy and go for an early pick and do a severe triage on the table and do a lot of destemming. Or we can do a vintage. This could be one of the few times that you can do a vintage like your father. And what I meant by that is tannin, structure, concentration, depth, needs time to age. And that's what we have in 2012, because he took the father route. And I love it for it. It was a great decision, because there's not going to be many vintages where you have such small yields, such solid concentration, where you're able to, and he had the guts to make that decision as well, to go that route, because the reds are going to, like you said, Tom, start to be approachable now. They're going to be better in another 10 years, but they're just starting to be approachable now. They're still tannic, they're still a little reductive, they're still a little bit tough. And all that is coming from all 100% whole cluster, a punch down regime, more like his father's regime, okay, to get all the sugars out of the grapes, to make sure that we didn't have any problems during fermentation. But what that's going to do is that's going to create these tannic wines, these wines that are tougher, the wines that are going to be more reduced, the wines are going to be a little stinky for a while. But yet, 25 years down the road, they have a potential, cross fingers, because they had the acid to be bombs, to be wonderful, wonderful, wonderful wines. So he took that route, and that's what we have. So Rugien-Bas, big difference between Rugien-Bas and Rugien-Haut. Rugien-Haut is all sandy and limestone. Rugien-Bas had the alluvial fan part of the iron that ran into the clay of Pommard, and Pommard, the church, is sitting on clay. The Rugien-Bas is sitting on iron, because the iron ran into the clay and then got pushed towards Volnay. It didn't go over into Volnay, because Volnay's got a little bit of a slope. So it sat into Rugien-Bas, and it went downhill. And what it went downhill to, it went down as far north as the Chateau Pommard. It went down into Pommard-les-Crus, the village wine in Crus. Those vineyards all have the limestone, clay, and iron, where the majority of Pommard has the clay and limestone. So a little different terroir in the Rugien-Bas, and the biggest concentration of the iron is in the Rugien-Bas, and that's why. And one of the biggest spots of movement of the tectile plate movements is in the Rugien-Bas, and that's why Clive Coates started beating the drum of Grand Cru status, 30 years ago or 25 years ago, I think it was. You take all those factors into play, and you have type, you have Rugien, and you do 100% whole cluster. You have a big concentration.
Oh, hang on. I think I might have lost him again. I got as far as concentration, whole cluster, then a beautiful freeze frame of that wonderful new Hemingway-esque beard. And hang on, let's see if he comes back. Still there.
He's trying to outdo you in the beard stakes, Tom.
Yeah, a lot more grey in there than me, I've got to say. So that's pleasing. But I think it's fascinating for those still with a smidgen left in their glasses. Of course, Rugien-Bas is not only a famous vineyard, but famous from the domain here too. 2012 as a vintage generally for me in Burgundy has been an intriguing one. I've more often been satisfied than not, but it's not. I wouldn't say it was a charming vintage. It's not like 17, which has that openness that we were discussing earlier. It doesn't have the sort of the warmth of the 18, which just has that general kind of enveloping sexiness. Is a word we're not supposed to use these days to describe wines, but I think it's fair in 18. They are sexy wines. 12, it wasn't angular, but it had all the components there, but it took skillful winemakers to mesh them into wines which were greater than the sum of their parts. And I think this Rugien-Bas is a brilliant example of 12s done well. and when they are done well, you know, they are amazing wines. It's no, it's definitely worth the patience, I think. Oh, Brian, you're back.
Brian's back.
Yeah, please go for it.
I'm obviously dropping. So where did I leave off?
You were in a dumb period.
Yeah, I think we're to be honest, we've pretty much done the 12 vintage. We've done Rugien-Bas. You were just saying. I think actually you were coming to a wonderful conclusion.
That's it. Yeah. I wanted to sign off. I wanted to drop the mic, but I don't have a mic, so it just cut out. I don't know. Yeah. So there you go. That's the I think Rugien. There's as you guys probably know, there's certain vineyards in Burgundy that win no matter what you do. They make for example Puligny-Cairet. You can make that wine in 5 different styles, and then 5 years, 10 years later, the vineyard expresses itself. You have, and that's the beauty of Premier Cru, or kind of like a Petit Grand Cru, like the Cairet, or like the Rugien-Bas, or like the Taillepieds, or like the Grève. These are all vineyards that you guys pick. These vineyards in a way stand out. They stand out. They show the wines how they should be if they're made in a transparent wine. But transparency can also be revealed in so many different ways as well. So my idea of terroir is using the plant material, doing punch downs, and using.
Frozen again.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back. Yep. Well, whilst we refine Brian, I would just say before we wrap things up on that note, and it's not that we planned this, as you could imagine, but it was whilst tasting with Etienne about 5 years ago. We did a blind tasting of Rugien-Bas and Puligny-Cairet, which is one of the top whites, which Brian just mentioned, and we did it from each wine was from magnums, from 2 very different vintages, 10 in the case of both wines, and then 03 and 16, Puligny and Pommard, Rugien-Bas, respectively. And the fascinating thing was that 03 as a vintage in Burgundy was largely written off at time of release, and shortly after is now being very much reappraised, particularly for whites. And it was Etienne who, exactly as Brian is echoing here, said, and I remember it was very interesting comment, said that great terroir heals the vintage, and this was exactly the case. Puligny-Cairet 03 from that sort of vintage had no right to have that kind of clarity and that precision and that depth of flavor and character from a vintage which was universally written off at the time, but because of the quality of the terroir, and not a bad level of winemaking either, it was actually a really, really good wine. So Brian, you're back. I think you're back, which is great. I think we've come to the end of our hour. And obviously it's been, for me, it's been fascinating. I hope it's been interesting for our guests. I know a few people have had to drop off for one reason or another. If there are comments or queries or questions you'd like to ask now, whilst we've got Brian, before we lose connection into Burgundy again, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask stuff, then please, now's the time. Go for it.
Hey Brian. Thank you. I just had 2 questions. Question 1, how in the world did you end up in Burgundy? 1, and then 2, if you had to pick a kind of your favorite wine that you make that's a bit undervalued or maybe misunderstood by the wider market, what wine is that? Thanks.
Brian, you're muted. Hang on.
Another dumb period, Brian.
No, we're good. I'll make it quick. My wife was born and raised in Lausanne, Switzerland, and we met in we're both mountain bums, and we got into wine together, and we moved back to Europe together to be closer to her family, and I spent some time growing up in Europe when I was a kid. So there you go on that. The tough question on the wine side of things. I think the Saint Julien is one of those. It's a great choice. I think those guys did a good job picking that. I think the Pommard another quality, price point, value wine. I don't know what those guys. I haven't looked at everything they get, but we also make a Saint-Aubin en Remy. That quality, price point is just fantastic. It's one of those vineyards that it faces south, but it has deep enough soils to hold on to moisture. That's another a little bit of a sleeper that can be a cracker for sure. We have a couple. It's kind of delicate to say, but I'm a big fan of Volnay. I feel like Volnay is truly an area that has a level of transparency. You have to deal with your whole cluster in a very light fashion to express it in a good manner, to make it not too Pyrazini, enjoyable, give the wines interest, but not make them too simple, to have character. And I love chalk, and I love clay. I love chalk, and I love limestone soils. I like what that gives to wine in times, especially with red wine. So those, I'm a huge Volnay fan in the end. And but I think they did a great job with the Saint Julien. It's a sleeper of a cru, as well as the Pommard as far as price point, interest, quality. Those wines from the Domaine can be good choices.
Brian, we had a question from David here saying, sorry, hang on, David, where was it? It was, here we go. It was here, damn it. So David said, in the last 10 years, how do you rank the years in the last 10? 2016 has been picked up as one to watch. So how would you rank the last 10 years, Brian?
Let me say it like this. White wines right now, I like that. If I was going to open up white wine, I'd open up a 10, and then I'd open up a 12. Those are my two tops right now, but probably has to do with the fact that they've developed and they're starting to show their true colors. I think the 15 whites are fantastic too. I think 15 whites are a total sleeper. A lot of people, the 18 whites are going to be a total sleeper as well. I don't think people are focused more on the reds in those vintages. So, but I love the 14s are closed right now and they're shut down. But those in the 17s are going to be dynamite. That's my personal opinion. For the whites, for the reds, I feel like I'm going to need a current stock of 17s at all times, because I have a hard time keeping my hands away from those when I go down to the cave. But that being said, the 10 reds, if anybody has those or in their cellar, 10s are just silky. And I feel like what I love about 2010 is that you can be in Burgundy or you can be in Barolo, and you can open up a bottle and the tannins are soft and delicate and long, and both are starting to evolve in a great leathery tannic capacity that I really enjoy. So I'm a big fan of 2010. Obviously 2012 is something that you can put down in your cave for a while. The 16s as well, you can put down in your cave for a while. The 13 reds are drinking fabulously right now. I know I'm not necessarily answering the question on how I'm going to rank them, but it's a little bit like ranking your children. So I'm just going to tell you how they're drinking. The 14 reds aren't ready. The 14 whites aren't ready either. So those are going to be keepers. Both those need some more time. I haven't touched any 15 reds, but the 15 whites are fantastic. 15 whites are definitely fantastic. 16 whites are showing they're going through a stage of evolution right now. So they're approachable as well, but they're going to be they're going to go like this for a while. They're not going to necessarily, there's no hurry on the 16, 17s, whites, for sure. 16 reds, put them away, forget about them. Here I come back to the 17s, drink, 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 drink. Does that help? Does that help anybody? The 19s are going to be more of the 19s are a cross between the 17 and the 16 vintage, the reds, in the sense that they're going to be drinking a little bit earlier than the 16 vintage, but they have a style and component to the 16 vintage that is on that classic side. They're not as classic as the 16 vintage, but they show a certain level of tannin and a certain level of depth to them that are going to want some time, but they have a very airy inside like the 17s to them. So it's an interesting vintage that we're just putting in the bottle right now.
Thank you, Brian. I think, David, you're not going to get a 1 to 10 rating, but it's a pretty good summation of when you should drink and which ones to look out for.
When am I coming next? That's what you guys, are you guys shut down right now? Everything's a no-go?
No, that was absolutely terrific, Brian. Thank you very much indeed. It's as someone that's bought Burgundy over many, many years, to get an insight from someone who's got lots of it to taste is really, really interesting, because we only get a few bottles, and knowing when to start and when not to start, or when it's good, and particularly through the village, up to, if you're lucky enough to have some Grand Cru or whatever. I buy my wine to drink, and to have those windows of opportunity and to find someone that's really interested and steeped in the winemaking is fantastic to hear. My last question was, and what do you feel about the Hospice wine which you made for us?
The 19 or the 19 or the, I guess the 19 was last year's.
There's one that's just gone into bottle.
Yeah, I think you guys had a barrel of Dents de Charité and the Gros, the Meursault. Is that correct, Tom?
That's right. From the 19, yeah, and then 20 we had the Volnay, the Mouton, and we had the Meursault from 20. Yeah.
Okay. They're your 19 Gros, when whoever is getting that, I hope you like it, because I like it a lot. I like the 19 whites a lot. I feel like the 19 whites have, once again, let's go back to what I was saying earlier tonight about Burgundy is in a window, and the Pinot and Chardonnay and Burgundy, we are still in that finite window of these two varietals that need a certain level of moisture when they're not irrigated, and they need a certain climate to show their optimum. We're still in that window. How long that window is going to last, I have no idea. I know Burgundy's been around for a very, very, very long time, but we're also seeing changes at a level that we haven't seen in the past, and an evolution in the climate that we haven't seen in the past. So the wines, I ran into, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Michel Bougereau. Michel Bougereau has a domain. His son is Jean-Baptiste Bougereau, and he's making fantastic wines here in Meursault. But I ran into him just after vintage this year, and he said to me, he goes, "Brian, you're spoiled." And I said, "Why, Michel?" And he goes, "When we used to have to make wine, we were dealing with rain, unripe grapes, acid that would burn your skin, and élevage that could last for 2 or 3 years. You guys right now, you're all spoiled." So he's got a point. It's all perspective. It's all perspective. We have great weather to ripen our fruit. We have good acidity that we can pick when we want to pick. We're picking without having adverse weather conditions in this late summer or early fall. The conditions are relatively optimal, and I feel like because of that, you guys are gonna start to see, in general, we're gonna start to see vintages coming out of Burgundy that are gonna be more consistent than they ever have before, for multiple reasons, of course. But part of that is that the climate change has benefited Burgundy to make things a little bit more consistent. Now, how long that window stays open, I don't know. We just need to take advantage of it while we have it open and do as much as we can to keep that window open as much as possible. And making those steps, a lot of Burgundians are making steps right now. We're all, a lot of people will say, oh, I'm doing the same thing I've done all the time and forever and blah, blah, blah. I'm not really changing much. But in the end, we are doing things that are adapting with the times and evolving and trying to improve our scenario. Because if we weren't, we'd be digging ourselves a hole we can't get out of. So that movement is happening, and we just need to be as smart as we can to hold on to that as much as possible. So
brilliant. Thank you.
Brian, can I just ask a quick question on that? What are you doing? What are the specific steps you're taking? I know some of your brethren are buying land to the north of the.
You guys, Tom and Nathan, you guys let anybody on these calls. Yeah.
Hey, what can we do? Yeah. Hey, if they've got the security code, they're allowed in. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Very nice, Brian.
Hey, Henry, you well?
All good, thank you. Enjoying the evening very much.
Okay, for example, and I'm just going to cite this example because we're in the middle of it right now. We have just almost finished pruning the vineyards. We still have the plants to prune still at this point in time, and people are out there burning canes to get rid of the salmon that we've pruned off the vines, as well as to add a little bit of potassium back into the soil. But what we're doing, and the studies inevitably have shown that the amount of pollution that we're creating with these burning the canes is an astronomical amount of pollution, based on the fact there is still treatment chemicals in these canes. Even though that we're organic and biodynamic, inevitably there's going to be copper and sulfur in these canes. So when you put that back out in the atmosphere, you're doing no good to anybody. So, but what we can do is we can use a service. We can collect our canes. We can bring them to the end of the row. We can relocate them to a parcel that we have. We can have a service come that's going to chop up these canes and reintegrate them back into our compost, and use that compost back into the soils to kind of to add more nitrogen in two different levels. One, if it's a young compost, in a nitrogen aspect, and if it's an old compost, in an amino acid aspect. So we can provide that diversity for whatever our vineyard needs in a complex fashion. But what we're also doing is we're using machines that are going to be much less pollutant than, say, burning the wood and putting that back into the atmosphere. And we're chopping it up and fermenting the wood into our compost. So it might not sound like a major step towards CO2 carbon footprint, but any little step that we can make is going to be a beneficial step for the future. Okay. The more that we can work on our soils and on the health of our soils, the less we have to drive our tractors, and the less we drive our tractors, the less we're creating pollutants, whether it be buying new tractors that are burning more efficiently than some of the old Tapanel, or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of different things that are being involved right now, that we're trying to make decisions in the best way that we can, while staying efficient in a very closed-minded way that we live in.
I appreciate the answer. I guess I was asking more about, there's only so much that you can do and control, because actually it's everyone else in the world that is creating the climate change as well, and does that impact on how you're looking at the grapes and the vines, rather than necessarily what you're doing yourselves to reduce the carbon impact?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think. Obviously, this is, Henry. This is one of those things that we should share a Gero bomb over this conversation one evening, if you have time. But I feel like there's different things that we can try and do locally. It's going to kind of help as well as how we have to be reactive to some of the bigger things that are problematic towards what we're facing as well. You know, and I think we just have to be flexible, like everybody else has to be flexible in that capacity. And I probably in the day-to-day life for you know, for each and every one of us, you know, whether it be driving to work or taking the tube or whatever it might be, or, you know, or how things are affecting us. I think we all just have to be smart about it in the future.
Totally agree. And I look forward to the Jerbo.
With pleasure. With pleasure. Tom's on mute. Is he on mute? Or am I on mute?
No, he's on mute.
Nice.
Can I just jump in here then?
Yeah.
It's been an amazing evening. I've got three, maybe not quick, and you can choose to skip, but one, en premier, Cote de Nuits versus Beaune, thoughts? Two, with regards to your reference, David, some like sort of technology that you're using, I'm just curious about, you know, French viniculture domains adopting actual technology versus perhaps story generations of experience. And then the last is with regards to harvest, are you open to volunteers? Thank you.
Okay. So harvest, we're always looking for people for harvest, and it can be a gas. The vineyard Cru is managed by a spicy Italian guy, and I don't think there's ever a moment where either you love them or hate them, and everybody's laughing in between. So it's a good Latin way to live. One. I think a lot of people, as far as technology versus what's handed down over time, I think as a foreigner myself, I came in here. There's one side of things that they treat foreigners a little bit better than they treat French people from other regions, because they question why that French person would leave their home region, but yet they feel like they understand why a foreigner would come to Burgundy, because Burgundy's Mecca. Okay, so as somebody that's coming from the outside to Burgundy, the eggshells that I walk on are different than other people's eggshells, but nonetheless, I'm walking on a certain level of eggshells. And we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and nor should we try and reinvent the wheel, based on the fact that things have been growing here for a very, very long time, and grown in a great way as well. They established themselves really well a long time ago. So, but I think the more we share our knowledge and information together, the more we work together as vignerons, whether it be, we all have our close friends. Some of our close friends just happen to be domain owners in Volnay that we work side by side with in a bunch of different vineyards, and we see on a daily basis. So we're able to share a lot of information. So it's almost like a cross-pollination of information, whether it be from Grandpa or from Polytech, that kind of comes together and that works. I think the people that have one way, whether it be the extreme right or left, compared to a blend of everything, is less successful than a blend of everything. So at this point in time, to answer that question. So we're progressive. Domaine de Montille is relatively progressive, because there's a good chunk of the vineyards that are being managed by by an Anglo-Saxon, well, me, with a spicy Italian. So we're working together and sharing as much knowledge as we have together and moving forward, but we're always learning and developing and sharing and being progressive in that way. So we're not part of that ancienneté that's behind us, but yet that's all being shared around us. And the points, obviously, it's a little bit like when a grandma walks up and hits you with her cane and says, you should be doing this with your baby, not that. Then you say, yeah, maybe we should. So we do a little bit of that, not all of it. So a little bit of trials as well. So in that way, it's good. It's fun. It's enjoyable. I think they enjoy having us around as much as we enjoy having them around, without anybody telling each other that they enjoy each other's company. Okay. And so what was your last question? I forget your last question now.
En premier, Cote de Nuits versus Beaune, please.
Are you speaking for like in January, when you're making pre-purchasing, when you're tasting out a bottle?
Pre-purchasing.
Okay. For like 2020 or 2019?
20.
20. Go with your price point. They're dynamite. Find the producer that you like and go with your price point. The vintage is going to be, it's going to be very much like 18 in the sense that there's concentration, there's depth, there's power, but yet there's still acidity. The 20s are, the 20 reds are going to be something else. The 20 whites, I'm gonna hold back right now, but the 20 whites could be very 2017 style. So that kind of acidity, we had a certain level of volume that created a certain level of acidity. They're very bright, they're very fresh, but a lot of everything that we have is just finishing malolactic fermentation. So one day I'll get rose petals, and then the next day I'll get poopy diaper. So I'd love to, I don't know. Would you buy a poopy diaper from me, or would you prefer rose petals? Yeah, that's how. So I think, but the 20 reds are going to be fantastic. So just go with your price point, and you can't go wrong for sure. And find the important to find the producer that you really like. Find the producer you like, and then trust them.
I think, Brian, that's always goes true with Burgundy generally, you know, more than any other region. Maybe Barolo that you mentioned too alongside, but you know, you find the grower you like, and you follow them, and you will love the wines, you know, irrespective of vintage. You'll just need to drink them on different days or possibly different decades. Now, team, for those of you that the die-hard hangers on, well done. Massive thanks to Brian. You know, as ever, you know, huge respect, huge love. So much knowledge, so much passion, you know, so much going on there. Brilliant. And poopy diapers too, if you're lucky or unlucky. Yeah, we have had a number of people on the call tonight who are members of one or other of the Beaune syndicates, either 19 or 20 or both. We will, Cade, we will definitely be organizing a Burgundy trip for syndicate members for sure. You know, if not this year, maybe this year, we'll just have to see. We will wait and see, but you know, it'll be awesome to come out and see you, Brian, out in Burgundy for sure. Thanks once again for a great evening, amazing wines. Give our best to Etienne as well. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you again, either in person or at another tasting very soon. So thank you very much on behalf of everyone.
Wonderful wines, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, and don't hesitate if anybody wants to ask a question or get a hold of us, just shoot me an email, and you can go through Nathan and Tom for that email address, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So
yeah, we'll follow up with everyone tomorrow with available wines, Brian's details, you know, you name it, you'll get it. Brilliant, team. Lovely to see you all. Enjoy your dinners, and see you again very soon for our next tasting. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Ciao. Bye.